Tyler Kiwala is an ET experiencer, independent researcher, and a passionate disclosure activist. He is known for being one of the co-hosts of Journey to Truth with Aaron Kuhn. And Tyler's journey began in 2010 after his mother's passing and his visitation from shadow beings. He's had experiences with inner earth beings, Sasquatch, greys, reptilians, and even been asked to be recruited to join covert military programs on Mars and on Earth. So he's got a ton of experiences and information to share with us on Exopolitics Today.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Tyler, to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's an honor, and I've been watching you for a long time, and I'm just grateful to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm always interested in how people start out. You know, what gets them kind of involved in the UFO issue. For me, it was Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project press conference in May 2001. I watched that, and it just changed my life pretty much then and there. So what happened for you?
Well, looking back on it now, things were happening my whole life, but I didn't understand it, until you go through an awakening, and then you look back and like, oh, wow, that was significant. For instance, in 5th grade, we had the Air Force come to our classroom. 2 men in full uniform, they came in and they wanted the entire class to invent their version of a spaceship. And they told us that young minds have the best ideas. And so we all had to draw a sketch and design a spacecraft. And I remember very vividly drawing a triangle type of craft. And everyone else was basically drawing rockets. And I thought I was like doing something wrong. So I almost changed mine to a rocket because no one else drew what I drew, but I left it that way anyway. And they collected all of our papers and said, thank you. And then they just left. And that memory stood out to me my entire life, because whenever you're a young kid and these men in uniform walk in the room, it's enamoring. You're like, wow, look at these guys. And I never realized the significance of that until I was an adult, being connected, to programs and how the children they're very taken at a very young age. So that was like the very first thing going back. But it wasn't until my mother passed away and I started going through I would say like energetic attacks, astral attacks, sleep paralysis, all that stuff. That kind of forced my awakening, because I didn't believe in a whole lot of stuff, and it forced me to believe in stuff that I just laughed at before. And through that, I just started discovering this is all connected, and it led me to, first it led me to like how to overcome my sleep paralysis and these demonic attacks and stuff. And then it led me to understanding that sometimes it's not even just entities and demons. The CIA has declassified documents that literally talk about dream warfare and dream walking, which is, sitting in meditation, astral projecting, or even inducing a lucid dream state. And they can astral project into someone else's dream and quite literally attack them if they wanted. And it's all written out in the CIA's documents. And they have their walking through wall systems, patents. I mean, everything that is supposed to be not possible, they have documents for. And they just kind of got like quietly, silently released and slipped out onto the internet in like 2017 or something. So I started discovering like there's this astral realm, this spiritual war going on. And I was like literally battling it. And sometimes I would miss work because I would be, these attacks were so intense. If anyone suffered sleep paralysis or had the entities on them, it's not fun. So there is a lot to learn from that. And it was, if I look back on it now, I feel like it was like training, like building, kind of like leading me to where I'm at now and helping me to understand the depth, the lengths that they'll go to and the depth of the spiritual war and what is actually happening on this planet. And that inevitably led me to learning about the secret space program and all that stuff. But before my awakening, before all that happened, I had this man come into my life named Larry, which I write about in the book, who basically wanted to recruit me for this Mars program. I had never heard of this secret space program at the time. I was still, my awakening was just around the corner. Little did I know. But it was this whole like 3-4 month period where he was trying to recruit me for this Mars program. And he basically taught me everything that he knew that he was being told to him, which I believe now is through Voice of God technology. But it was about, weather warfare, parallel timelines, time travel, secret societies, clone programs, underground cities, underground bases. I can go on and on about the things he was telling me. Some stuff I won't even say because I know we're on YouTube, and it's some of it was very dark, and I didn't know what to believe at the time. But nevertheless, it all happened, and he went missing in 2017, and on Labor Day of 2017, Labor Day weekend, for 7 years. He wanted me to go with him. I didn't go, and I thought surely I would see him the next day because I just thought he was crazy. And he went missing for 7 years, and that was my first glimpse at all this stuff. Right around the corner, right after that, I found Cosmic Disclosure, and I learned about the secret space program. I came across Laura Eisenhower's testimony, which talked about the Mars recruitment. And I'm like, wait, this happens to people? Really? This happens to somebody else? So I had to go back and revisit that time of my life and like take it a little more seriously. I'm like what was happening? Because when he would hang out with me, like the government vehicles, like blacked out vehicles, SUVs would drive through my neighborhood. The helicopters would come by, and it was obvious that something was happening to him and he was being followed. And that was my dogs never barked at cars ever. And they would bark at this black vehicle that would drive back through my neighborhood by my house when he was at my house. And I just had to revisit all these moments. And like, was this really a Mars program he was trying to recruit me to? At least that's what he believed he was going. He was told that basically there's going to be a catastrophic event in 2017 of Labor Day weekend, and that they were bringing people off planet to Mars to help preserve the human race and blah, 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 this whole narrative, right? And which it turns out that's kind of what Andrew Basiago was told as well, something very similar. And I think that's how they sell it to people. And he had very specific details of how we would get there. He told me about a government time travel program that he knew of. The specific one he was talking about was started in the 90s. And he was talking to this homeless lady who was like, a homeless lady, and she's a time traveler in disguise as a homeless lady, and she was basically giving him his intel, and there was this whole long story, and I had to like, wait, was all that real? Because I just wrote it off as this guy being nuts, but I was entertaining him, and there's a lot more to the story, but we don't probably have time for the whole thing, and but it was that right after that when I learned about the secret space program, where something just fundamentally changed within me when I started hearing about it. Like I knew on some level I was either involved or I just knew at a soul level that it existed and it's very real. And it became a passion just to learn more about it as much as I possibly could. And we eventually started Journey to Truth podcast, where it was just amazing. I met Aaron, we started the podcast, and we got to interview people and talk about this stuff. And then we did a secret space program month in 2021, and that's what kind of put us on the map. And then we did our SSP conference after that, and that's kind of what started my whole targeting journey. I feel like the closer we got to like uncovering this stuff, the more over the target I was, in a sense. And had another guy come into my life in 2022 under the guise.
Before you go to that, I just wanted to ask about the Mars recruitment, because Laura Eisenhower described something very similar, and she said that the person running the Mars program was a very famous scientist, Dr. Hal Puthoff. So did you ever come across anything about Puthoff being involved in this Mars program?
Aside from what Laura talked about, no, I haven't. I know there's a lot of information out there at this point that discuss what's going on Mars, and potentially like some of it's happening in a higher dimension. There's questions. We all have questions, right? But nevertheless, I think something is going on there, absolutely, and it's part of the secret space program. But no, it's specifically about Hal Puthoff. No.
Okay, and Now, I know you mentioned that experience when you were in school and you had that the soldiers come in uniform, and that was very suggestive in terms of what you drew. But your father was also involved in this, and this kind of suggests some kind of multi-generational aspect to your own experience. So you want to maybe bring in what your father experienced and how that might relate to you?
Yeah. So my father and his mother, my grandmother, turns out after we started talking, she started sharing some stories, more not like SSP type of stuff, but she is an experiencer as well of other stuff. But it kind of ran in the family. And her husband, my grandfather, was in the military, and he trained at like Fort Leonard Wood and Jefferson Barracks, which was a military base that I essentially grew up on. And I never even connected the dots until after the fact, but that was in St. Louis, Missouri. My dad, he was never in the military, but when I started going through this stuff and I finally opened up to him, he decided to share with me that when he was young, he had memories of being taken on a craft by these, for lack of a better term, gray ETs, and they would feed him this like goop. They would put this goop in his mouth. He talked about a lot, and he just like the memory would end, but it was like it would happen often, I guess. And he had some other stories too, but it seemed to be, the way he tells it, you can just tell like it was impactful to him. And then the movie Fire in the Sky, ironically enough, like depicts him up on the craft and them literally shoving that goop in his mouth. So I wonder if, there's something there, part of their procedure, whatever it is that they're doing to us. I don't know. But as far as other than that, my dad didn't tell me about too many more things that happened to him, but that was one. So obviously if they were taking him, I'm sure by proxy it was happening to me and maybe even other family members, but they just don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, I did read your book, and I do recommend it for people who want to know your story. I think it's a very entertaining read. So, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But in your book, I mean, you did talk about Larry and how Larry was given this Mars recruitment offer, but it was after he had publicly criticized Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama online. And so it was almost like a punishment. And that kind of like there's a similarity with Tony Rodriguez, who was put into one of these secret space programs as a punishment. So, yeah, I just wanted you to talk about that in terms of, how often do you think that happens, that people put into these secret space programs as punishment for, insulting someone or criticizing public figures, getting too close?
Yeah, I would say often. I would say in some capacity, the person was already groomed up to a certain point anyway. And when you join the programs, you can branch off. You can go the light or the dark, dark side or light side, And I feel like they might even set people up to frame them so they can punish them and put them into the dark fleet or knock off or whatever you want to call it. I think that happens quite often because whoever is pulling the strings in the military industrial complex obviously don't have our best interest in mind. We do know there is an alliance faction, but it seems like every time somebody is like told that they're going to join that branch or they're promised or whatever the case is, something happens that compromises them or they get punished and they get thrown into the dark program. So they sell it to you. They sell it to you by making it sound wonderful. But then once you get involved, I feel like you're set up. It's like a bait and switch type of tactic. And I would say that's common. And honestly, I never even really thought about that with Larry as far as those posts he was making. Because back then in 2017, he quite literally everybody we worked with thought he was nuts on Facebook posting this stuff. And some of the stuff I won't say just for censorship reasons, but he was saying very damning things about the Clintons and Obama and very positive things about Trump back then. And back then I didn't even like Trump, or I didn't know, I wasn't involved or anything. I didn't understand what was happening, but I just didn't like Trump because everybody else didn't like him, But he was trying to tell me back then in 2017, like Trump was here to do something really good. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll just take it with a grain of salt and see what happens. And then he started, saying that Princess Diana's death was staged, and they acted out the tragedy with a clone, and she's still alive, living on the ground somewhere. And I would ask him, like, how do you know all this stuff? And he said, they're just telling me in my head. They're just telling me in my head. And I didn't even know about voice of God technology until later. So I think that was being used on him in some capacity. And there's a whole other list of things that he told me about. But one of the most interesting things I found was parallel timelines. Like, he had awareness of that even. And he told me that there's like timeline A and B, and there's these two timelines running simultaneous, and they're constantly like battling because they never know which timeline is going to be solidified. So they're trying to make adjustments. And he said that you can find signs of it if you know where to look. And he told me to just use, because we used to be big hockey fans. So he used the NHL video games as an example. He's like, look at the covers of the video games. They always vote on one of two covers. And the other cover is the team that won the Stanley Cup in the other timeline, is what he told me. So they never know which timeline will be solidified. So they put it out there as a vote to let people think that they're voting on a cover. But really, it's because they've seen the timeline, and one of two teams could win. And it's just an interesting interesting observation if that is true. So I don't know. He was just telling me all this stuff and weather manipulation, and he went as far as telling me that people could actually control the weather with their emotions. Like, he's like, there are people in these secret societies that don't even need this HARP facility. They can control the weather with their own powers, I guess, and their emotions. And if they got angry, they can create damage with a storm if they wanted to. So. This was 2017, and I had no idea about any of this. It was like a waterfall, like a fire hose of information that I'm surprised I even remember half of it, because I know there's things he told me that I just don't recall.
Right. Now, you had a gray abduction experience, so you want to tell us what happened?
Yeah, so that actually wasn't, this is where it gets into the whole, are grays bad or good, right? It wasn't a negative experience for me, and it wasn't a physical abduction. It was like an abduction of my consciousness, but maybe that's just the way I perceived it. Nevertheless, I woke up. This was at a time when everything was just heightened for me, and things were happening all the time. I woke up in the middle of the night, or I felt like I was woken up, and there was, for lack of a better term, like a hologram of a gray ET head, like floating. Maybe it was just in my mind, but I saw it at the foot of my bed. And it like woke me up, but then it told me to close my eyes, and I closed my eyes, and like it felt like I astral projected onto a craft. And I don't know if it was a craft, but it was a round room, all white lights. It was so bright. And I was laying there. I was on this table, and I was strapped down, but I wasn't strapped down with straps. They were like energy bars almost. And like, it was like a force field in a sense that would hold me down. And they didn't look like standard grays by any means. I wouldn't actually call them grays, but it's easier to call them grays because that's the closest thing they resemble. But they had, 3 little fingers each, and there was 3 of them on each side of me, on my whole body. And I could only like move my head and look, but I couldn't make out their features because it was so bright. It was like, they were more like silhouettes. And it felt like they were doing Reiki healing on me. They were just like, they were like scanning my body, like doing energy work. But back home, my awareness, my physical body was still in bed. But I knew, this is funny, but the vibration was so intense in the room, like I was buzzing, quite literally buzzing, to the point where, this might be too much information, TMI, but my boxers like started actually riding up my legs because I was actually vibrating so intensely. And it was starting to like give me like almost like a wedgie laying there. But it also, it made me have to use the bathroom. I had to pee. And I'm like telling them telepathically, because, well, first of all, when I was up there, I was asking them all these questions, like, who are you? What are you doing? Why am I here? What is this place? And nothing. But it was all in my mind. Somehow you just automatically know telepathy when you're in those situations. And it was all in my mind, but it was all met with silence until I was like, I'm going to pee in my pants in my bed. Like, I have to go to the bathroom right now. And the connection broke, and I got up and used the bathroom. But the entire time, I felt like I had something plugged into the top of my head. My crown was just tingling, like, so intensely. I came back into my room, and I noticed my dog was laying in bed, like, nearly looked like she was sedated. Like, she was breathing so heavy, and she was just out cold, which I found interesting because she would always wake up if I got up. And I laid back down thinking that it was over. And when I closed my eyes again, I was pulled back out of my body, and I was up on this craft. And they finished. They were doing some more work, and they finished. And this guy, this insectoid hybrid humanoid, walked in the room, and from my right, and they kind of stepped aside, and he got right in front of my eyes, like right in front of my face. And you know how a doctor does the light, an eye doctor does the light in your eyes like that? That's what he did, but with his eyes. His eyes were like piercing my soul or something. And he was going back and forth like that. Just looking at it from going back and forth from eye to eye. And then he kind of looked over my whole body, and he looked at the little guys and nodded to him, like as a nod of approval. And then the connection was broken. I was just back in my bed. And it was insane. Like, I was like, what the hell just happened, you know? And it was, I don't know why or how I was able to be fully consciously aware during the whole thing, but I was. It wasn't like some memory that happened to me in a dream. This was like a real-time scenario that I'm not sure exactly what was going on. I have some ideas that I talked about in the book, what could have happened, but it was interesting, very interesting.
Now, you also had an experience with an inner Earth female with a very interesting name. I'll let you pronounce it. Right. So, yeah, you want to tell us what happened with that, how you prepared for that meeting or manifested it?
Yeah, so I was, along with learning about the SSP, the Secret Space Program, I also started discovering Hollow Earth and reading those testimonies, and the Emerald Bird Diary and the Smoky God and all these books. It was just blowing my mind. I'm like, what is going on? There's a space program. The Earth is hollow. Like, how did I not know any of this? You know, and I kind of became obsessed with researching Hollow Earth. And I would listen to these people, these experiencers, and people claiming to be in communication with these beings. And they basically explain, like, it's pretty easy to communicate with them. You just have to, like, set the intention. And they kind of gave some tools, like sit in meditation and imagine like an etheric cord connecting your third eye to their third eye, whoever it is you're trying to communicate with. And it was just this whole little practice. And at that point, I just kind of wanted, like, I was learning about all this stuff. I didn't want to go to my job anymore. All my friends kind of like ridiculed me. I felt like I had kind of, I don't know, I was just going through the awakening, right? And I just wanted to escape. I just didn't want to be here. It was very difficult. I was learning about this stuff, and I just, like, going back to work, just the thought of having to go to work every day was killing me, and just it was hurting my soul, you know. So I was just like, I want to get out of here. I was trying to communicate with these beings, whatever I could do. So every night I would sit in meditation and just basically imagine that. I would imagine whoever it was listening in inner Earth, and I would just try to start that line of communication. And I was unsuccessful for a month, but I kept doing it. I became obsessed. I was like, I know I can do it. And one night I fell asleep meditating, and I woke up in the middle of the night to a text message from an unknown number. It said, "Are you ready to meet us?" And I was like, I knew without even questioning. I knew, like, I felt that it was them. And without even asking who this was or anything, I said, yes, of course. And they said, come to your back door. When I lived in St. Louis, in that house, my room was in the basement, and it was a walkout basement. So I just walked to the back door, got up and walked to the back door in the middle of the night. It was in my underwear, and I just opened it up and looked outside, didn't see anything. Looked in the sky. Then I'm like thinking, man, like, one of my friends is pranking me. Like, I know they're messing with me. This is like, I can't believe I even thought it was real. And I'm just standing there looking out in the yard, and nothing. So I just, I don't know, maybe a couple minutes, and I turned around to go inside, and I saw this apparition like phasing into my basement, and scared the shit out of me. Like, I don't care who you are, when you turn around and see somebody in your house in the middle of the night that isn't supposed to be there, even if they're there to help, it still startles you. And it startled me, and I kind of froze. And then as she became more perceivable, because she was translucent and she was blonde with this white gown and this blue undergarment with this medallion thing on. Excuse me.
Yeah, that medallion, when you get back to the story, just tell us more about that medallion.
So it was gold. I don't remember. I couldn't see any details. Like I said, she was translucent and the whole thing was happening so fast. It was like an apparition, like you kind of see caught on film sometimes, but I was seeing it with my own eyes. She wasn't fully phased into our reality. Like I heard from the knees down, like wasn't even there. It was just like, but she still seemed very tall, much taller than I was. And I was like frozen in fear, not because I was scared of her, but I was like almost in this mild state of paralysis. In hindsight, I think what happened was also, I think for those beings, higher dimensional beings, to show up in our reality, they have to alter the density of the room to be suitable for them, because it's just quite literally too dense for them to walk around on the surface. So I think she altered the density of the room to even show up. And by default, I kind of was in a state of mild paralysis, but it wasn't painful. But it was just such a high frequency that I couldn't really use my body. And I'm standing there looking at her, and it's like the most beautiful thing. I don't know how to describe it. Just this golden white being, And she just telepathically told me, "Honey, you're not ready." and that was it. But it wasn't just that. It was a whole download of stuff that I put in the book. But it was basically it was this download of emotions and visuals and all the stuff that kind of would become more apparent in the days to come. But in the moment, she just said, "Honey, you're not ready." And I got this download, and she smiled at me and just then disappeared. Yeah, and that's an interesting drawing too, because I had an artist. I said, "Hey, can you draw a poster for Journey to Truth with Aaron and I in Inner Earth?" And this is what she drew. Aaron's cut out of this picture because I used this in my book, but this is what she drew, and it was almost identical to what was happening. Like it was a very accurate depiction. And so then she phased out, and I ran back into my room to check my cell phone. Like I was like, "Oh my God, nobody's gonna believe this!" And I wanted to like screenshot those text messages, but there was nothing on my phone. And people always gave me shit telling that story. "Oh, they can't text you; they would never do that." Well, actually, the more you look into Inner Earth, they also use the internet. I mean, that's like a common thread across the testimonies. And apparently they have their own amino acid based internet that's kind of like uses the mycelium network to transfer information instead of using the satellites. But nevertheless, it's been said that they can easily tap into our internet, and some of them even have online accounts and social media and stuff. Who knows? But the evidence, I guess you can call it evidence, the evidence is there that they could potentially tap into our internet and even cell towers.
I just wanted to kind of jump in there, because I think this is very important, that some beings, whether we're talking Inner Earth or extraterrestrials, can tap into our internet and communicate with us through chat messaging and so forth, because that's that's what happened to you, and you saw the being. But also there's this Swaru material that I've just recently started to investigate, and they described a very similar process where the people who started to put out that material just started to get these chat messages, and they learned that these were actually a group of extraterrestrials from the Taygeta star system. But I think that's important, that you also started to communicate with one of these Inner Earth beings after getting text messages on the internet. So this is happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the way it happened. And some people have tried to debate me so hard on that fact before. I'm like, I'm done fighting it. I'm defending it. Like, that's what happened. You believe it or not,
Yeah. Oh, good. Now you said something in your book that I found kind of like pretty intriguing, and that is that we as souls are tracked during the death, birth, and reincarnation process. And so when we are born, we are targeted, or those of us that have special gifts and talents that maybe can make a difference to the world are targeted, mothers are traumatized, and so forth. So can you tell us, how you learned about that?
Yeah, so it was actually old Max Spears interviews where he used to talk about that. But when he talked about it, but he didn't go as deep as I went in the book, because that just kind of came through once I realized, like, oh yeah, that is happening. Because when you learn stuff, I don't even think we're learning it half the time. I think our soul's just remembering it, and that's why it resonates. So when I heard him talking about that these souls are tracked and they know which families they're going to be born into, and they know they target them at birth, and that's the whole reason that even like the whole birthing process in the hospital, the way it is designed to create a traumatic birth and to start traumatizing the mother and by proxy the child in the womb, and then the child through the immunization, the intense immunization schedule right out of the gate, which the womb is a stargate, a portal. But it's all to basically fracture the mind before it's debatable, but as early as possible, before the age of 3 would be ideal, or 5 even. But they want to fracture the mind, so whenever they do bring these people into programs, they can more easily create an alter because they've already been traumatized. And the more I kind of sat with that and meditated on that information, it was just becoming very clear. This picture was being painted, and then I would see the evidence. I'm like, wow, like everything is like, you walk out your front door and you're just being attacked, bombarded with frequencies in the air and the water and the food. Like, you can't escape it. And I'm like, oh, it's all designed this way. They have set this whole system up. So when the children are born, like, obviously there's groups out there, and even groups within our own government, that have technologies that can track souls. And I fully believe that's possible. And I've even had my own experience that we can talk about in a little bit. It's not in my book because it happened after my book, where I kind of was witness to this. And I think that absolutely they have a technology. They just know who everybody is, who they were in a past life, what family they're going into, what bloodline they're going into, and they want to control it. And they know who the brightest lights are, so they try to make sure those souls don't remember who they are while they're here on Earth, even though they're here to remember who they are and they're here for this mission. At all costs, they want to dim our light so we don't remember our light. And I think that's why a lot of people get targeted, including whistleblowers too. Whistleblowers who come out of these programs and start telling the truth. Sometimes we see them get compromised and targeted, and they destroy their own credibility through some very poor decisions. This is by design, because they want to keep a lid on what's happening right now, but they can't. They think they can. But they want to, as soon as somebody starts to break programming, it's like they send in reinforcements. They send in the team, the entities, the military, whoever it is, to keep that person at bay, make something happen in their life that distracts them so they don't pursue that path of enlightenment. And it's all very well, they're evil geniuses. It's all well thought out, and they know exactly what they're doing. And it's up to us to realize that, rise above that, and then you can navigate this whole game, I guess you can call it, without being under such heavy attack anymore. Because once you're aware of the trick, it loses its power over you. Once you know the magician's illusion, that it's just an illusion, it's not impressive. And then therefore it's not enamoring you, therefore you're not falling for it.
Now, JP, and I think you know who he is, a former US Army, and he described in one of his missions that he was hooked up to a machine that tracked his past life memories. And not only were they interested in his past life memories, the operators of the machines were interested in the people that he was connected to in past lives that were incarnating into this life, because we don't incarnate as isolated starseeds. We come in as groups, star groups. And it was very interesting that JP was saying that there's this technology that he was subjected to where they were actually tracking not just individuals being born, but groups, people that would incarnate as a group to bring about change. And so that was kind of like confirmation for what you discovered.
Yeah, I fundamentally believe that. Absolutely. We come here as soul groups, and as we awaken, these people come into your lives that you meet at these events and conferences and stuff, and you immediately know who they are. You remember them on a soul level. You don't know how you remember them, but there's a connection. You feel closer to them than you do with your own family members. That's what that is. You're remembering this soul group that you came here with. Some people remember it better than others. This woman gifted me a book recently where her and literally 31 other people or 30 other people, all somehow that group, they all remembered what their mission was. And they collectively they found each other and they remember where they came from. And then she wrote this book that documented they all remember the same past life and what happened before Earth and why they're here. And so it's an amazing account of of people starting to remember that mission. And I've never seen it detailed as well as that, but other people, we understand that it's happening because we can feel it. So I would say that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Now, in your book, you talk about this John, this insider, and you found out that he worked with the Office of Naval Intelligence, and later on you found out he was a warrant officer recruitment specialist. So, and what his job was in terms of star seeds and classified programs. So, you want to tell us about John and how he tried to recruit you?
Yeah, absolutely. So some people might know who he is. I won't give any more details, but we did interview him a couple times, and we ended up removing interviews because we found out who he was, and he was not an integrity of who he said he was. In some capacity, some of the stuff was legitimate, some of it wasn't. That's how they trick you, right? But a colleague of mine, put me in contact with this guy who had this incredible information. And sure, I'm always looking for somebody new to interview. And we got on the phone, and basically it was like a 3-hour phone call the first time. And he was blowing my mind with all the stuff he said he was involved in, clearing out these underground bases and some even off-planet missions, and just some very, very specific details of what he was involved in, including, and he really impressed me when he started, he kind of knew things about me that he couldn't have known, even down to like health issues and stuff that how would you possibly know that? I've never talked to you in my life, almost as if he had a file or he was remote viewing me or whatever the case, looking glass, I don't know. But he caught my attention, and I was like, okay, I'm interested, tell me more. It started off as a phone call that was, I was just going to vet him for an interview. But then what it turned into before I realized was a grooming process to recruit me into this program. And he was very vested in helping me enhance my psychic abilities, and he really wanted me to work on remote viewing. And he said remote viewing is the one thing that they look for most, above and beyond anything else. If you can remote view, you can help them in some way in the programs. And he would explain this stuff to me. And just like Larry, he was telling me all this other stuff that was blowing my mind. And he was telling me about this natural portal system and how these black budget, these groups, these covert groups, they'll use this portal system to travel around the planet even. Maybe not in the main branches of the military, but the classified section and division, the private sector. And he was like, this is how they travel. You don't think that aside from the maglev system, there are groups of them that actually use this portal system as well. And we know about these portals and stuff from national parks and people going missing and all that stuff. There's documents of it everywhere. Missing 411 does a great job covering it to an extent. But so he came into my life, and it turned into this grooming process. And before I knew it, I was kind of talking to him every day, and things got really interesting. And one day he was like, well, what do you think? Would you ever consider joining a program like the one I'm in? And I said, yeah, right. I said, no, probably not. I think everything I've heard about these programs, they sell it to you, but then as soon as you sign the contract, it never ends up well. And he's like, yeah, fair enough. But he's like, would you consider it if you could? I was like, what, are you trying to recruit me? He's like, well, what if I was? And I said, well, what would that look like? And I was curious too. I never planned on joining this program, but I wanted to see how far I could take it. Just for one, as I was interested, but two is research as well. I'm like, okay, we interview people about this, but here I am in a situation where I'm literally getting asked, let's see what this turns into. And he basically, we got into the Zoom call, and he did, like the Zener cards or whatever, you have to guess what's on the other side of the card. He did this whole psych eval. He was having me like testing my psychic abilities and doing other weird stuff that didn't make sense to me. Then he asked me this like long series of questions. And the very last question he asked me was, what's the one thing you want more in life than anything, more than anything in life? And I said, love. It was easy. Like, love. I want to find that one person out there who's looking for me. And he's like, well, you realize you can't have both. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you can't join the program and be in love. I was like, well, why not? You're married. He's like, it's complicated. He's like, you won't have time for the relationship, basically. And he's like, that's your final answer? I'm like, yeah, it's my final answer. Like, there's nothing more important to me than love. And he said, well, don't be surprised if you're tested in that area in the coming week. And what does that mean? He's like, you'll see. A week later, this girl shows up on Facebook. We meet. Under the guise of remembering each other from the programs, like all this crazy stuff was happening. And it started this whole, I became effectively, at that point, I was a targeted individual. And a lot of negative things happened, including military abductions, including my trip to Australia to meet my girlfriend. The entire thing was targeted to the point where I almost had a heart attack because I believed a direct energy weapon was being used on me. And there's a lot that happened during that time period. And I found out after the fact through somebody I know who's connected with the Navy and the ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, that they couldn't find his name in the database, but there's a classified database of people in the projects, right, that you just aren't going to find in a public database. So he had his buddy at the ONI run this guy's name. Turned out that he was a warrant officer recruitment specialist tasked with recruiting gifted starseeds into the program. And he came into the disclosure community under the guise of a whistleblower. So he was like not only doing this to me, I found out, but there was a number of people he was going to trying to recruit them as well. And people like fans of ours in our audience. And I realized, oh my God, this is actually a dangerous thing. And because if what happened to me, I don't wish upon anybody. And if it's happening to our audience now or anyone who's listening, like we just deleted the interviews. I cut off contact with this guy. But it all actually stopped after my girlfriend and I broke up. That's when the targeting stopped. But then when I kind of found out who he was, then it was like my whole life took a turn for the better after that. And because I was not only being abducted into these military programs, which I have memory of, which is in the book, but they were the worst psychic attacks I've ever gotten in my life, the worst demonic sleep paralysis experiences in my life, while I was consenting to this guy and everything he was selling me. And I finally broke free from that, like mind control. It was almost like I was under a spell. That's what it felt like. And once I broke out of it, I saw it so clearly. And I'm like, oh my God, like, how did I even let it get that far? But it was one of the most interesting things that's ever happened to me. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself in particular. And I don't regret it. I wouldn't trade that experience for the world because, for one, it helped me understand, like I said, how deep these programs go, what these people are capable of, the lengths they'll go to, the technology involved, and how they target and track people, and what a real life scenario would look like, putting trauma bonded people together in a situation and then targeting that relationship. I mean, it's all very real. It happens. And there's a book out there called Alien Love Bite by Eve Lorgan. You might know who she is. She kind of lays this out, in particular, how they'll target the relationships. And I was experiencing some of that, but it was very multi-layered, So it's like you have military involvement, but then there's this extraterrestrial involvement and this like shadow realm. Like, I don't know. It's like they're all working in tandem. And it seems like some of the technology they use is entity-assisted technology. Like the technology is no good without the entity. And it's like, there's an entire world out there of things that just aren't supposed to exist, but it's all real. And I was at the receiving end of that, and I learned about it firsthand, and it's not necessarily fun, but I'm glad I did, because now when I interview people about the secret space program, I targeted individuals or whatever, SRA abuse, all this stuff, I know it's real because I've experienced it, and I don't have to interview them as a skeptic. Now I can just hey, I've been there. Like I'm not interrogating you. Let's take this further. Like, let's understand what's happening here, because this is real. I don't care who you are or how much you want to deny it. Like, if you've experienced it, you fundamentally know it's real and it's happening. And the people that are out there trying to debunk, I'm convinced they're either paid or they're just simply NPCs, or they just don't want to wake up and this information threatens their reality. So they just, try to make it not true in their world, in their eyes.
You mentioned NPC, so it's worth just maybe elaborating on what that is, how you learned about it, and what percentage of the population, in your view, are NPCs?
This is a very interesting question that's been coming up a lot for me. So I learned about it through Dolores Cannon. She called them the background people that exist in this reality that don't necessarily, I don't know if they have a soul or not, but they're just kind of running on autopilot, like just filling in the background of our existence. And they're people that are never going to have an awakening. They're the ones that obey all the agendas. I mean, they're the ones who are helping fuel the matrix, right? They don't have, it's literally been taken out of their DNA that they'll ever wake up. And Carrie Cassidy's book, Rebel Gene, talks about that. It's like this rebel gene, this gene that will become activated when your DNA is activated, that will force you or cause you to rebel. That has been taken out of these people. And some of them might have quite literally even been farmed in breeding programs. And this goes into the whole Tartaria stuff and the Cabbage Patch Kids. It's a wild rabbit hole. But either way, there seems to be a group of people out there that aren't necessarily organic in the sense that we would understand. They were somehow created to be placeholders in this matrix, background people. NPC is like a non-playable character in a video game, and that's just what they're referred to in the public. I've heard recently that like 80% of the people on this planet are NPCs. I don't know. That's a very high number. I don't know if I believe that. Everything is with a grain of salt, even everything I'm telling the audience. Like, I don't expect anyone to believe this, but I just recently heard that 80% of the population is NPCs. I'm like, I don't know about that. We interviewed these psychic sisters, these three Black sisters on our channel recently. And I was like, I asked them, they're known for predicting the future fairly accurately. And I just asked them to tap into the NPCs. They didn't even know what it was. And all three of them were shocked. They're like, they didn't know what it was. And I'm like, wow, like, they're like, damn, like some of these people are walking around without souls. Like, they were being shown like these soulless people. And they were kind of like taken back by it because they were kind of learning in that moment in real time that this was a thing. So they were like taking notes and stuff to look into it more. But they tapped into it without even knowing about it. So they weren't front loaded with any information that would like help them like sway their decision. Oh yeah, they're real. They saw it without even knowing what they were, which I find interesting. And I think it adds credibility to the fact that there are people out there that just are operating on autopilot, and they may never wake up, and it might be designed that way. Maybe they're creating some sort of balance that we don't even know. The dark always serves the light. So you have to consider everything.
Yeah, I've heard similar numbers. 70, 80% of the population are these NPCs, which does it does sound like a lot, but also it means that those of us that come in as star seeds, part of these star groups, the number of the population that we need to influence to be able to change things is a lot less than what we thought. That if only 20% of the population are kind of like ensouled and are capable of making independent decisions, those are the ones we need to influence to help change the planet from this kind of like deep state bloodline family control system to something which is much more amenable to being part of the galactic community and so forth. So, but the NPC is a very interesting concept. I wanted to ask you about this incident with John, where you were taken to a Boeing facility and there was an incident involving this kind of black goo spider. So you want to tell us about that? Again, it's in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book, but it's there's something. Here's the thing. I woke up the next morning and I had the memory of where I was. So I didn't remember it while it was happening. I woke up and I was just like, oh my God, this whole thing happened last night. And I woke up in my bed quite literally like sideways, the wrong way. Like you sleep this way. I woke up this way with no covers on me or anything. Like I was just put back in the bed wrong or something. And I had felt like I had just been somewhere, like, and I was actually kind of sick. But I remember being taken to these facilities in the middle of the night. I kind of woke up in the back of this SUV, and I knew we were in Illinois because Missouri borders Illinois, and I just knew just by the surroundings, I could tell we were in Illinois. Well, at least that was my best guess. It was night. And we pulled up to these buildings, and I remembered it all very vividly, to the point where I had to like draw the buildings the next day, because I was like, this is like, I know this is a real place. I'm going to find it. And they brought me to these buildings, and they brought me around between the two buildings around the back door, and we went down into the basement of this facility. And it was like, it went down way deeper than I expected. And the ceilings were like 3-4 stories high. I mean, it was a big warehouse under the ground, under this Boeing facility, which is right next. It's in Southern Illinois. It's right next to the newest Boeing drone plant, where they're like building advanced drones, and there's an airport there and all that stuff. So I was escorted down by men in all black fatigues, and they were carrying their guns, maybe AK-47s, I don't know. And I was brought into this big room where there was a bunch of people surrounding this platform, for lack of a better term, about the size of a basketball court. And they brought me into this room, and all the people that were surrounding this platform, they were in their own like cordoned off squares, like that were outlined with yellow and black caution stripes. And in the room, the main guy, John, who I was telling you about, he was there. He was one of the guys in the SUV, and he was the one who brought me back. So it was him. And he walked across the room, and he put on this like hazmat suit. And there's a black woman with him. She put on a hazmat suit as well. And then the black woman's like, okay, anyone without a mask on needs to leave the room now. And everyone, by the way, all the people surrounding the perimeter had gas mask looking things on, like futuristic gas mask type of things. And so the armed guards that were with me, they started walking out. Well, I didn't have a mask on either, so I started walking out. And he goes, Tyler, not you. I turned around, and I started walking back, and they sealed the door behind me. And I walked up to the edge of this platform, and they're on the other side of the platform. So imagine a basketball court. I'm on one side, and they're on the far side of it. So I could see him like that far. And they were in these white suits, and he like reached down and like turned this like canister on the floor and pulled it up. And inside it looked like something from a sci-fi movie or something. It was, I couldn't really make it out because it was all foggy. Like it looked like dry ice, like some Hollywood special effect or something. And it had some tongs on it. And like, so he like lifted it up, opened it up, and then he reached in with these tongs and pulled this thing out. And when he let go of it, it looked like black goo. It looked like graphene oxide, kind of like you see under a microscope, and it kind of moves on its own, and it's like self-replicating. So this thing just started like floating on its own. But as soon as he took it out of the canister, and it started emitting this energy that literally knocked everyone in the room down to their knees. Like it almost like somebody just turned up the gravity, and you were being pulled to the floor, and like you almost couldn't get up. Except for the two people in the suits. Somehow that suit was protecting them from that, and myself. And I recognized the frequency that was emitting from this thing, because it was a frequency I had been battling for years, almost a decade, through sleep paralysis. I had learned how to overcome the sleep paralysis, and break free from it very easily. And I was so used to it that I just was familiar in my body. I knew how to tackle that and overcome it. So when I felt it, it was familiar to me, and I started to go down, but then I just innately resisted it because I had been battling that for so long, and I was able to stand, and not only stand. So I started like without even trying. For some reason, it wasn't actually bringing me down. I started levitating, and sounds crazy, I know, but this is what happened. And this might have been in a parallel timeline too, and I put this in my book. So it might not even have been like the me now, but like it was me in another version of me in another timeline. You can't rule that out. I started levitating off the floor, and this thing was basically getting higher and higher in the room, and it was constantly morphing, looked like a graphene oxide spider, black goo spider. And it was actually getting bigger too. It was like self-replicating. And basically it was coming up and I was coming up. I was meeting it in the center of the basketball court, for lack of better terms. And like the whole room was basically watching, they were like on their knees, but they were looking up. And I just innately somehow knew what to do. I don't know how to describe it, but I just did what I did in sleep paralysis. I created this like nuclear explosion of white light. I put my palm out and it just like literally generated like something you would see on Dragon Ball Z or some cartoon or something. And I just basically put my hand out and like this light blasted this thing and it just quite literally dissolved in front of me. And as soon as it dissolved, like it just like almost like literally dissipated. Like I don't know how to describe it, disappeared. And as soon as that happened, everyone was like freed. They could stand up and like breathe. And then I just kind of like floated back down naturally. And the people were looking at me like they were applauding. Like they were like, they couldn't believe that I had just did that. And I walked across the room and like everybody was walking towards the John and that woman in the suit after I landed. And everyone was like talking amongst themselves, like pointing at me as I walked by. And they were talking amongst themselves, and I kind of overheard them say, "We're bringing him in," and they wanted me to go through this back door. And when I walked into that room, I don't remember what happened next, but next thing I know, I'm inside of this abandoned shopping mall where one of these things was loose, like with the thing I had just battled was loose. And there was already a team of people in there, like trying to fight this thing, like they were sent in to take it out. And I looking back on it now, the whole thing might have been a training simulation. It might not have been real. I don't know. But I went into this abandoned mall and did the same thing. I just like easily like just blasted this thing. And then once I took care of it, like the whole memory ended. And that's when I remember waking up. I just woke up in bed, sideways, uncovered, sweating. I felt sick, and I had the full memory of that. And there's even details I left out now for time's sake. But and I wrote it off as a dream at first. I just wrote it off as a dream until the universe said no, it was real, and put me in contact with somebody who was a delivery driver to that specific Boeing facility. And whenever we started talking, like as soon as he said Boeing, like it all just came back. I'm like, oh, that was a Boeing facility. I got online, Google Earth. I found from the aerial view, it looked like the two buildings from above. And I did the street view. And I'm like, oh my God, that's real. And they're only 42 minutes from my house in Southern Illinois. So I got in my car and drove there. And when I pulled into the lot, I was changed forever, because this went from me being able to gaslight myself into believing it was a dream to these buildings exist. Here they are. They match exactly what I drew. And what's going on? Like, why was I taken if that was real? And how did that happen? What am I involved in? It was actually the moment that made everything real for me. Like it wasn't just, these people aren't just telling these stories from these foggy memories. Like something is happening. And I don't know how to make sense of it yet, but it was happening, and I decided to document it. So that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, one of the things that really stood out for me in reading about that incident was that you were able to just tap into your heart energy in creating that white light that neutralized that black goose spider, and that would explain why it is that the programs are seeking star seeds, because if there's one thing that's pretty clear with a lot of these programs is that kind of heart energy, that natural empathy that we feel for one another, being civilians and having relationships and going through life's traumas, is that you learn to develop empathic connections with people, and being a civilian, it's natural to do that. But in the kind of programs in the military, it's a very different animal, and I think developing that kind of heart energy is much more difficult, rarer, which is why they then use a lot of these star seeds, recruit star seeds, because what's natural for them is much harder for the people in the programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they can't, the show Halo, the TV series Halo on Amazon Prime, I think it's one of the best disclosures of the SSP. And in that show, I'm only telling this story because I think this is what happens, and I think they're telling you in the show. In that show, they're not taking the body, they're not abducting the kid and then cloning the kid. They're literally abducting they're abducting the kid, they're making a clone of it, but then the clone is sent back to live out the rest of the life with the family, and the original body is the one that's brought into the programs. And they said because nothing, they can't recreate the soul's innate abilities through a clone. Like the consciousness can go, but the gifts and the talents can't. So in the show, they needed the original body. So I think that's absolutely happening. Like in some cases, we know we've interviewed people that claim to be clones after they were cloned into programs or cloned when they got back, and they're still here living amongst us. We interview them, we're friends with them. But if their testimony is true, then they were cloned into programs. That means we're talking to a clone, somebody who it might be exactly who they were, but they might be lacking in some areas because the original soul died. I don't know. Or the original body died. I don't know how that works. But either way, I think that it's very important to them. That's why they can't have a robot army, because they need the intuition. They need the heart. They need those abilities that only a human has. And that's why it's so important to them that they track us and bring us into the programs. And of course, it's ethically and morally wrong in every way possible. But that's what they're doing. And we know that that's hopefully coming to an end and there's a cleanup happening. So maybe that's not going to happen as frequently, especially these kids that are coming in just turned on already. I think they're going to be somehow protected from even being taken by the dark forces in the first place, hopefully.
Can you tell us about the density chambers that you came across and what you know about secret space programs and extraterrestrials operating in the 5th density while we on Earth are mainly in 3rd density?
Yeah, absolutely. So this came from what put the idea in my head was Carrie Cassidy, Project Camelot interview years ago, 2010, I believe. She interviewed this anonymous whistleblower who claimed that the Mars that the people are remembering from the secret space program is Mars in the 5th dimension. It's Mars in another dimension. And he claimed that if you went there in the 3D, you wouldn't find what these people are remembering because it exists in a higher dimension. And he said, he went as far as saying that the jump room to get there was an underground base somewhere in Texas that he knew of. And he explained jump rooms and all that stuff. And I was like, really? I was like, I don't know if that's true, but it's interesting. And then we met Daryl James years later and came across his testimony. And he described when he was brought in through RAF St. Morgan in Cornwall, England, they put him in a density chamber to bring him artificially push him from 3rd to 5th density, because he was told that the extraterrestrials, primarily the entire existence of the secret space program and the beings involved, operate in a 5th density. So we won't even perceive them here in the 3rd density. So he had to be artificially pushed up into 5th density, which by proxy raises your IQ, makes you stronger, faster, gives you night vision. Like it enhances you in a number of ways. So I was like, okay, so we have 2 people now talking about these programs existing in a higher dimension. When we interviewed Andrew Bashago, I asked him the exact same question. I said, do you think Mars that you went to was in this dimension? And he said that's something that him and Bernie Mendez used to debate about, and they actually considered that they were actually going to a higher dimension when they went to Mars. So I'm like, there's the entirety of the secret space program, does it exist in a higher dimension? And I had to ask myself these questions. And through my research, I come across time travel and all this stuff, and it seems to be that what we understand as a space program with like rockets and propulsion and all that stuff is a very 3D level, and there might be secret factions of that in operation in low Earth orbit. But I think that where we're getting these testimonies from is maybe potentially largely coming from a program that exists in a higher density. Maybe not in all cases, but I think, most of the technology described in these programs are going through jump rooms. They're in these warp-capable craft using dimensional shift technology that quite literally travel in another dimension to remain undetected. It's not hard for them to hide it because it's not even in this frequency, so we don't perceive it. And when people get their memories back, they're talking about something from quite literally another reality. So there's no concern for security breach because we're talking about something that exists in another dimension, which, as far as we're considered as a mass global population, isn't widely accepted yet. Of course, yes, they're talking about it, but are people do the masses explore other dimensions? No, it's only done in these secret programs. And then there was an anonymous Area 51 whistleblower in, I think 2008. I put I transcribed some of his interview in the book, but he talked about the private sector, the shadow government being aware of multiple different dimensions and having the ability to not only communicate with them, but traverse these other dimensions. And he said that in each dimension, the planets take on different forms. And in the higher dimensions, like Jupiter looks just insignificant, like a gas giant here, but in the higher dimensions, it's entirely civilized and inhabited. So it was really interesting to hear him come out, if that was an authentic whistleblower, which I believe it was, just basically by feeling into it. I think our government has known about these other dimensions, and I think a lot of these programs operate in parallel realities or higher dimensions, higher densities. And so we're talking about a much bigger picture, which brings in interdimensional politics, temporal wars, time travel, things that we don't really consider. We interviewed Dan Cooper, who talked about Temporal Management Command, a faction of the Navy who's out of Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And he said they're basically like there's a timeline war going on, and this temporal war, and these dark groups are basically creating timeline deviations. So the Navy has a group of guys that goes back to correct those deviations. But through this temporal war is how we start to see these Mandela effects, because every time somebody makes a jump, it changes something. And so it's a much, much bigger picture. It goes much deeper than we think. It's not just that there's a secret space fleet at Area 51 that's just going up to the moon and Mars here in the 3D. They might be traveling in other dimensions, time traveling, going to parallel realities. And I think it's all real, even including the 3D secret space program. I think it's multifaceted and it's all compartmentalized, and not everybody has the whole picture, especially if you're involved and you've been indoctrinated into believing that your branch or your division of the Black Project is the only one that exists, because we've interviewed those people too. So it's easier for us on the outside who interview all these people to extrapolate that and connect the dots and paint a bigger picture, because we haven't been indoctrinated through the military. And I think a lot of the immunizations in the military have a lot to do with mind control and emotional suppressants. And they keep these men it keeps them in line. So they never question authority and act out. But some do break free, and that's where we get our whistleblowers. But if I was to put my money on it, I would say that the majority of the programs exist in a higher density.
It's very interesting. Yes, I've come across a few contactees that talk about density belts, that sometimes they're giving a density belt so that they could make that adjustment from third density to fifth density and hang out with the ETs and work with their technologies and so forth. Now, it's interesting that I've come across the Swaru material talking about how basically exactly what you were saying, that the extraterrestrials, SSPs, operate in the fifth density out there, but that the Earth is mainly in this third density. And they say that that's pretty much maintained by the Galactic Federation so that we don't go out there and manifest nightmares and so forth. So, yeah, well, what do you think of that idea?
I think that sounds right. And for one, it helps also explain what happened to me at the Boeing facility, because I certainly can't levitate and shoot light out of my hand here in this reality. I've tried. you know. So if I was brought to another density, timeline, dimension, reality, whatever word you want to use for it, it would explain how that was able to happen and what's going on there. But I absolutely agree, especially the density belt part. That's something else in Daryl's testimony. His executive officer, Robert, claimed to be from the fifth density. He claimed to be from the higher density dimension, whatever you want to call it. And he wore a density belt. And Daryl asked him, he goes, what would happen if you take that off? And he said, you wouldn't see me. He goes, I would look like a white flash, like kind of how we see ETs out of the corner of our eyes. Like you'll see something. That's what it would look like. And Daryl asked him, he's like, but you're married. Like you're married here. How do you hide it from your wife? And he's like, I wear this bracelet. It's like a density bracelet. But she didn't, he told her, like, she didn't even know what it was. She just thought it was like one of those metal, like copper bracelets for his health. But she had no idea that, like, if he took that bracelet off, he would disappear. Like, because he's already been acclimated to the fifth dimension, fifth density. So he needed the density belt or bracelet to even exist here. And that was fascinating to even Daryl at the time and to myself learning about it. And yes, these density belts do show up in other people's testimonies. And I think there's something very real to it, you know, and a lot of the off-world Germans and other people involved in the programs on Earth, they might be wearing density belts or bracelets as well. I mean, for all we know.
Interesting. So there could be a lot of people around us who are wearing these density belts or density bracelets that allow them to be able to operate in third density and vice versa.
Right. Yeah, and it's the bracelets, you know, if you read the Sands of Time and the Sean David Morton material, the Time Runner devices, like they basically turned into a time machine, from a time machine into a watch, basically. And the watch itself is the time machine, and they call them time runners, and these people can just like basically go anywhere they want based on the coordinates and stuff. And so it's all, and we see these bracelets in like the Anunnaki history and the Sumerian tablets and stuff, they're all wearing these bracelets, right? And it makes you wonder, are they density bracelets? Are they time travel devices? Is that what that actually is? Because in the Sands of Time material, it describes the Time Runner device as basically looks like an Apple smartwatch. But they were using them decades before we have the smartwatch now. So maybe this bracelet that we see in all these sacred tablets and hieroglyphs, it's either a density bracelet, a Time Runner device, or both.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very interesting that we, in the kind of public sector, you know, we think of secret space programs in terms of rockets, anti-gravity craft, being able to take you from point A to point B, but that when you read a lot of these insider accounts, and you mentioned Sean David Morton's Sands of Time series, it's really time travel that is the name of the game. And you know, this is something I've come across again and again. Different whistleblowers talking about it, but you want to just elaborate on just how time travel really is what is the most important thing happening now with the secret space programs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that has been the name of the game, and I think through Project Paperclip and Werner von Braun and a German scientist coming here and putting Werner von Braun at the head of NASA, I think that was all to basically keep us focused on this rocket program while the Germans were secretly developing time travel. And there's a great history of that in, the Sands of Time material, but it's in other places too, with the Vril Society channeling blueprints. And in a nutshell, they were channeling blueprints to build a UFO, not for the Germans. At first, they wanted to get back to Aldebaran. They wanted to get back to their home planet. They had been trapped here for hundreds of years. And they were waiting for Earth civilization to get to technologically advanced enough to help them build a craft so they can get home. That's the story. So they found a group of scientists to help them build it, a lot of civilians too, because they didn't want to involve the German government or military. The first craft, they crashed it in a test flight. And so they ran out of funding to build another one. That's why they had to approach the German government and Hitler and Hans Kammler and Karl Haushofer and all those guys back then. And they said, hey, listen, we need to get home. It's a whole long story. And they approached them like, we'll help you build one of these for yourself. We'll teach you how to build them if you fund us to build one so we can get home. That was the story. And that's what happened. But these weren't just flying saucers. They were flying time machines, essentially. and they didn't leave space in a traditional way. Finally, when they built a successful one, what they do is create a portal. It opens a portal and it goes through the portal. And a lot of times we see these like SpaceX launches and all this stuff, or these like Norway spirals and stuff in the sky. And everyone tries to write it off as just like a rocket launch, a traditional rocket launch. But I look at that, I'm like, I think they're just opening portals and flying out of them right in plain sight, and they're just giving people this cover story. I feel like that's what's happening, at least in some cases, absolutely. And they know that they rely on us to just believe in anything. And even if we don't believe in it, they know there's nothing we can do about it. So they can just feed us whatever BS they want. But these are flying time machines. So it takes them basically a trip, I forget, 65 million light years away to Aldebaran could be done in 1 hour through this wormhole, through this portal. And that's described in detail in those books, and even in a declassified document that Sean put in book 7, and he died shortly after that. And I think some of that material is why he was targeted and given throat cancer and wrongfully imprisoned and all that. And but it talks about this history of time travel in the shadow government. And when we learned this stuff from the Germans, we were secretly developing our own time travel tech when we were reverse engineering these UFOs, these craft. They were noticing all these time anomalies. They would go on a test flight, and they thought they were gone for an hour, and they'd be gone for 3 days. And everybody at the facility was worried about them. Like, what? We were just gone for an hour. So they realized this isn't just a UFO. It's a flying time machine. And then they learned how to basically get control of that. And they built these devices, and they called the first one they built allegedly was the Ringed Beast, they called it. They nicknamed it at Area 51, and they basically used it to teleport to the moon. And it was like their first official jump room, at least in the United States, at least as far as that material is concerned. There could be more that we don't know about. But nevertheless, they've been developing this stuff since the Philadelphia experiment, because the Philadelphia experiment was using dimensional shift technology to basically help the ship travel back in time 15 minutes prior to an attack, to basically give them an edge in a war strategy situation. Well, we know what happened. They lacked a psychic navigator is what happened. I learned that from a quantum physicist I met here in Sedona, who spent 40 years in the shadow government and taught me about a lot of this stuff. He was brought in to the project. He was in the Air Force, I believe, and then he was approached and brought into the private sector to help perfect the technology that they were using in the Philadelphia experiment, which was a time travel technology. And it was a dimensional shift technology. He said when he was brought into the programs, it was the size of a room, a living room or kitchen, or a big room. And by the time he left the program, 40 years later, it was the size of a cell phone or credit card, and you can keep it in your pocket. And it's just basically an on-off switch for these ships, and it allows them to dimensionally shift and travel outside of time and space as we know it. And that's what they were doing with the Philadelphia experiment. That's what the Nazi Bell was doing. The Nazi Bell, the first time they were able to get that thing operational, they didn't necessarily build it right because they didn't follow the plans specifically. And what happened was that Nazi Bell disappeared above the facility in the hills of Germany, wherever that secret facility was. And they thought they lost it. Well, they didn't lose it. It time traveled 20 years into the future into Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. And you can go on Wikipedia and look up the Kecksburg, Pennsylvania UFO incident, where a bell-shaped craft crash landed into the woods in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in 1965, and it had these hieroglyphs on it. Well, they're Aldebaran hieroglyphs that were in the same blueprints that the Navy spies were bringing back to the America during World War II, what William Tompkins talks about. It's the same hieroglyphs. It's the same program, the same group from Aldebaran. So this time travel war has been going on for the entire time since the 30s, the 20s, 30s, 40s, and it really kicked off after World War II. But it's been going on the entire time, and also by proxy. I mean, they're creating literal holes, tears in our space-time. And when they create a tear in the early days, they didn't know what they were doing. And they were basically creating a dimensional rift where these other entities and UFOs were coming in from other dimensions, which I think explains the UFO flap in the 40s and 50s and why we had this spike in UFO sightings, because they were experimenting with time travel technology, creating tears in the space-time, and these other craft and extraterrestrials were slipping through from these other dimensions.
There's a TV series, I can't remember if it was on Netflix, called Timeless. And that kind of described, I think it's kind of like one of these soft disclosure movies where it described these a secret program where people were being sent back in time, and it was all about changing the timeline, bringing about desirable effects. And there were some kind of changes, but they were always kind of like minimal compared to what we would expect. So I don't know, did you see Timeless?
I've watched a couple episodes, yes. So yeah, I agree. There's the changes can be minimal, and that's what's described in the Sands of Time material. You may not even know like where the change occurred or who created it, because you don't know what private groups and corporations are playing with time travel technology. So whenever you have these deviations in the timeline, these Mandela effects, it's not even known by everybody. It's so compartmentalized, and people are out there bartering technology for humans and the galactic slave trade and stuff, and getting their hands on stuff that they shouldn't rightfully have their hands on. And I mean, they're creating what they call like a porous reality. Like we have, like, it's like a sponge, it's very porous, and we have these soft spots now where this dimensional bleed through can occur. And that's why we have these anomalies, like I think the Bermuda Triangle, the Alaska Triangle, all these places where people just seem to go missing. I think we've created these soft spots. Yeah, that's the show. Yep. I think we've created these soft spots in our reality where these things can occur. And I think there's well, in the book, the Sands of Time book, they talk about the HARP facility. Its original purpose was to try to create a frequency net over the U.S. to seal up these holes, because they didn't just want an open hole for these dimensional invaders to come in. A byproduct of that was weather manipulation, which I think it's used for today, but who knows what its true purpose could be. It's just, like I said, much deeper story than we've been told or led to believe. And in the late 1800s, Tesla built that tower in Colorado Springs. It's a scalar tower, which Andrew Basiago claimed is a device that the government uses to communicate with other dimensions. It's still there today, and the history is online. It was literally built by Nikola Tesla with no wires. It was a wireless transmission tower in Colorado Springs at the Lobo Overlook site.
Now, JP, one of his missions, he described going to a facility where there were these government military scientists working with these Nordic extraterrestrials, and that there were 4 simultaneous kind of like time travel experiments running side by side. One was to, I think it was to the year 1550. The other one was to the year 1940. Another one was to the year, I think, 2050. And another one to the year 2080, something like that. That they were very interested in the future timelines. They were very interested in space arcs. They were very interested in a future where humanity would have to live on these space arcs as kind of like refugees. So, yeah, have you come across anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that's exactly what I'm trying to explain. Things like that are happening, and time travel is the name of the game. And I think even Trump and some of the politicians, I think they know about this. We know Trump's uncle was there, and he's the one who got the files out of Tesla's vault. And obviously, Tesla was experimenting with the Tesla teleporter, which is a time travel device. And if that information was there, then that information resides within the Trump family. And there's a number of theories out there that claim Trump and Melania and Barron are time travelers. Well, what if they are? Let's just pretend. What if they are? Like, everything we see on the surface that's happening in the political arena right now is literally a smokescreen. It's political theater for what I would call an interdimensional, temporal, galactic war beyond anything we can comprehend. And that's what they're trying to keep a lid on. And that's why we don't have the disclosure that we want, because it's so much deeper than anyone can fathom. And for them to come out and just tell on themselves, I don't think we're ever going to see that, because they all have blood on their hands. It's an international scandal. People have been killed for talking about this stuff. So they can't just roll it out and like, oh yeah, here it is. They have to roll it out as breakthrough discoveries, new developments. And it's all a way of basically not blackmailing themselves. So it's not, the disclosure isn't necessarily going to look like what we want it to look like, but it's all there. Disclosure has happened. We've interviewed the people. It's all out there. You got to dig up these old interviews because they're trying to erase that history. And I think absolutely that time travel, even the space arcs, all that stuff, it all plays a role. And it reminds me of the Wingmaker, the ancient arrow site in the Wingmaker. The Wingmakers, they talk about basically a group of people from the future that came back and left these artifacts in a sort of a time capsule to help, we would discover it, and it would help advance our evolutionary consciousness and the civilization. And I think that happens more than we think.
Now, when we look at the kind of legacy media today, what people read and believe is happening is that, well, the United States under Donald Trump is having this conflict with China and Russia. They're not cooperating. There's a chance of kind of like things escalating, getting out of hand. But when we look at some of the insider testimonies, the picture we're getting is very different, that there's actually cooperation between something called the Earth Alliance, where Putin, Trump, President Xi from China, Narendra Modi from India are actually collaborating against this kind of satanic deep state, which is allied with negative extraterrestrials. And that right now, what we are witnessing is that there is a kind of battle happening all over the earth, in the United States as well, obviously, where you have these white hats, the Earth Alliance, working with positive ETs, going into these deep underground military bases, where you have some of these dark projects being run, and they're clearing them, or there's battles happening there. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I think that's what's happening, and I think there's a lot of evidence to support that. From the outside looking in, having no awareness of the stuff that we research, you won't understand that. Like, you really need to zoom out and understand the whole galactic picture here to understand what we're seeing play out in the surface in the 3D. And I absolutely think that there is an effort that's going on, and these people are collaborating to take down the New World Order. And we have evidence of this, hard evidence, in the 17 operation. I won't say the letter because it could get your channel taken down. But though in that operation, there's evidence of time travel, Project Looking Glass, some sort of quantum computing technology going on. And I think if you're going to take down a ancient global cabal, you would need some sort of edge. And I think that edge is time travel and looking glass devices that would allow them to be one step ahead of the deep state for the first time ever. And I think that these 17 proofs that happen nearly every day, there's these deltas. If you follow that, it's obvious, it's undeniable, it's mathematically impossible that there is something going on, and this has been well planned out, if not already happened in a sense, because of time not really being what we think it is. And I think that however it looks in the public eye, they're not even really concerned with how we're going to react to it, because they already know the outcome, and they're just going to move forward with these, what would seem like these crazy decisions and these alliances and all this stuff happening. And why is Trump sitting in a meeting in the White House with Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates? Like, it doesn't make sense, but it's layered, and there's more to it. And what we see is what they want us to see. Whatever optics they're trying to maintain, whatever illusion they're trying to maintain, I don't think that really matters. I think there's a much deeper picture being painted, and if you know how to look through that illusion and connect those dots, it seems to be that humanity is heading in the right direction. But if you don't have that awareness, if you lack that awareness and you lack the intuition to feel into that, then you're going to be manipulated through the mind, which is what they rely on. They manipulate you away from using your gut and your intuition, and they want you in your mind, and that's how they mind control you. And they want you to believe things are going one way when they're really going quite the opposite. And then you can get into the art of war strategy and all that stuff. 5D chess, I know people hate that term, it's a trigger word, but it absolutely is like that. I mean, we're thinking 4, 5, 6, even 10 steps ahead of the enemy in some cases. And I think there is obviously going to be pushback and moves and counter moves, and it's not going to be pretty, and things might not always play out the way it's predicted or the way they saw in Looking Glass. But ultimately, I think we've solidified a higher timeline, and it might not be this utopian paradise that we hope it is, where we want it to be immediately, but I think we're on that path.
So with that higher timeline, I think many that are part of this kind of like a white hat military alliance, I mean, they've already identified that the Star Trek future is the optimal timeline, that's what they're striving for. So is that something we should welcome, this Star Trek future, where essentially you have kind of like the military playing an outsized role in guiding our planet forward in terms of interacting with extraterrestrial civilizations, or is there another path?
I think if the technology is in the hands of the right people that are going to do good with the technology, then it's amazing, and it can be used to advance our civilization in ways that it should have been advancing the entire time. If that technology is being developed and is still in the hands of the wrong people, it's just going to be used and weaponized against us like it has been forever. So that's why it's really important for this cleanup to happen first before we can move into that Star Trek future. Because if you still have these groups out there, even if there's a rogue group that gets their hand on whatever technology it is that can still manipulate humanity into a lower timeline, we can't have that happening. So this cleanup has to be, from the inside out, and it has to be done from the inside out. And that's why I think there's a lot of double agents and triple agents and backstabbing and all this politics that people don't quite understand. If you've watched the intelligence agencies movies like the Bourne Identity or any CIA movie, you understand what that looks like. And no one trusts each other. Your friends are close, your enemies are closer. That's what it is like in the political arena too. So even the people surrounding Trump, like, he's keeping them close for a reason, because he's keeping tabs on them. But that has to be done so this whole thing can be undermined from the inside, and it can be cleaned up first. And once it's cleaned up, then we could start introducing these technologies to be used for humanity instead of against humanity. So I think it is absolutely, the Star Trek future is absolutely one potential positive path that we could take if things go that way. Obviously, there's this AI transhumanist timeline that everybody's getting chipped and all that stuff. And I think that might be a real timeline as well. And I think it's possible that both timelines could play out. And people are being presented with a choice right now. They don't understand it, but where they choose to put their, I guess, intentions and their path, and what path they choose is really making a choice on which timeline that they're going to move forward on. So I think it's up to us ultimately.
Okay, so I just wanted to start wrapping it up now, and maybe a good place to begin is, I read part A of your book, Bleedthrough Tales from other timelines. So yeah, do you want to tell us about what might be in part B of interest to people, and what you plan to write in the future?
Yeah, so part one basically lays out a lot of the recruitment attempts and the targeting and the stuff that happened after my mom died, the whole astral realm stuff. And so it's a 3-part book. So part 2 actually breaks down the history of, I get into quantum mechanics and explain the possibility of parallel realities, and I kind of break that down and provide like corroborating research to support my case that part 2 is the tales from another timeline. I have all these memories from other lives and programs that have bled through, and so much so that I've had to write them down, and it became a book. And I was like, well, there's something going on here. It's not just like I'm getting memories back from the programs. These all seem to be happening right now, but they all can't be from the same life. So then you get into quantum physics and the many worlds theory there, and there's like many versions of us existing at once. And I felt like I was getting like tapping into memories from those lifetimes. So that's what part 2 is memories from the other timelines. And then part 3 is downloads I got from a mushroom trip in 2022. I went on a hero's journey, and I started in the hell realm, and I went all the way up to source. And I explored things like the secret space program and stuff like that, even on that mushroom trip, just to be shown the mechanics of it. And it's all laid out there, and it ends with a very positive message. So That's the book. And in part 2, I have already some other memories coming through and things that I forgot to add in part 1, or I just didn't add because it would have been too long. And so book 2 is already up here, but we're working on a documentary first, the Secret Space Program documentary, and that's primarily where our focus is.
Great. So where do people go, Tyler, to watch Journey to Truth or get in touch with you or share experiences with you?
JourneyToTruth.online is our website. We're on Rumble and YouTube primarily. We're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, all that stuff. But everything is it's all umbrellaed under the website. So if you go to the website, you can find everything we do, including documentaries, webinars, our conferences, which we have one coming up in Hawaii, on the Big Island, April 20th through the 24th in 2026, if anyone's interested. We're excited about that. So we do much more than just a podcast. And Aaron has written a book too. He's working on a second one. And it started off as a podcast, but it's turned into something much more. And we're really excited about the next film we're producing right now. And it involves basically covering the secret space program in a big way that's never been done. And we're trying to reach the skeptics and do it in such a credible way. And we're submitting this to Amazon Prime and Apple TV and any other connections we can make. It's going to be a big deal, and we're hoping that we can get as many people on board with it as we can to help push it, because I think the timing of it's going to be perfect, especially with the news of Space Force moving to Alabama and all this stuff. I think we're going to get more and more. We're leaning into more of the secret space program type information in the public eye. Even Stephen Greer talks about some of that stuff. So I think the timing of it will be perfect, and stay tuned for that.
Okay, well, thank you, Tyler. You've done great work in researching all of these different areas and bringing that information out to the public arena. And I look forward to talking to you more and watching the documentary and the eventually the second book coming up.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I really appreciate it.
Okay, aloha.
Aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.